Urgent! The Celestial Empire is absorbing Russian lands. Xi and Trump have signed the Kremlin's sentence. The Kremlin is losing control over the East live on air. While Moscow was asleep, China launched an open offensive. Washington has finally lured Beijing to its side. Hungary has crossed the red line. Orban went all in with blackmail, but Zelensky delivered a harsh blow in response. There's panic in Budapest. This furious response from Kiev made the Hungarian Prime Minister's hands tremble. Huge catch for Ukraine. A top priority Russian target has been destroyed. Morning in Moscow. The Ukrainian strike clipped the wings of Putin's birds. A sensation in the sky. Ukrainian defenders brought down what was considered invulnerable. Dark days for Putin's Air Force. All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. China has delivered a blow to the back. The Celestial Empire is taking Russian lands. Trump and Xi are preparing a secret deal that will wipe out the Kremlin. Urgent! The Great Split has begun. China is no longer an ally of Russia. The Celestial Empire has launched an open offensive. This is a real sentence for Moscow. Watch for all the details. Russia and China are talking more and more about a friendship without limits. Moscow calls Beijing its main strategic partner. But now a new geopolitical game is starting around this friendship, called Russian oil.
And regarding the enduring Russian-Chinese relations, it can be stated with absolute confidence that during any time of the year, the relationship feels just like spring.
At the beginning of April, Trump is preparing his visit to China. And it is there that the US is considering the possibility of asking Xi to reduce oil purchases from Russia and instead buy more American oil.
However, it is truly impossible to imagine that the loss of, say, significant Russian oil supply volumes would maintain normal conditions in the global energy sector and the broader global economy.
More likely, a drop in oil volumes will lead to a decline in the Russian economy. But anyway, no matter how you look at it, China today is one of the major buyers of this very oil. And on top of that, Putin sells it to his friend at a good discount.
As for Putin, he simply has no other choice. If something really does happen in China suddenly, if the Chinese government suddenly decides to stop purchasing these goods, then the entire situation will inevitably take a turn for the worse. Of course, it simply does not seem to make any logical sense for China to refuse this offer. At least for the time being, I honestly do not see any specific incentives that Trump could possibly offer to make China refuse.
At the same time, in the West, it is increasingly said that China has significant influence over the Russian economy and therefore can use this influence politically as well.
But this war is fully supported by China, and China could call Vladimir Putin and end this war as soon as tomorrow by stopping the supply of dual-use technologies that they are selling.
Beijing is gradually expanding its economic presence even in regions that were previously considered Russia's sphere of influence, for example, in the countries of Central Asia. China is strengthening its influence in Central Asia. In Kazakhstan, it is preparing to build a nuclear power plant. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, it is seeking to take over the automobile markets. In Tajikistan, it is claiming a stake in the mining industry. China is investing in roads, railways, and infrastructure. Today, it is already the largest trading partner for many countries.
This process has been going on for a very, very long time. Chinese interests in Central Asia, well, they are at different levels in different countries, but they have been present practically from the very beginning after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China's influence there has grown so much that it has become visible to the naked eye. Previously, this was only noticeable to those who closely studied these countries. Of course, Russia's influence is still felt, but it is decreasing with each passing year.
Since I already mentioned the friendship without limits, this is precisely about how China is strengthening its position even within Russia itself, especially in the Far East. And it seems that the Russians themselves aren't particularly happy about it.
And the Chinese have long been saying, look, Baikal is ours. And I say, well, soon enough, they'll be saying that Crimea is ours too. They're already using all our resources, gold, coal, oil, gas, all of it. They're a global power while we live in poverty.
Although the funny thing is, it's actually Russia that invites Chinese companies hoping for investment and regional development.
Putin has brought a lot of old Soviet jokes to life. There was this old Soviet joke. The night on the Finnish-Chinese border passed quietly, and now Putin is rapidly moving toward making that joke a reality. And without a doubt, today Russia depends on China in every respect.
Interestingly, there's already panic inside Russia. Russian media are claiming that China intends to reclaim its territories.
In Chinese history textbooks, it's often mentioned that almost all of Siberia, including Western Siberia up to the Tomsk region, are temporarily lost Chinese lands.
And here, apparently, Xi has decided to play by the Kremlin's rules. After all, Putin also likes to tie everything to history.
Chinese companies are very active in the Siberian and Far Eastern regions. The Chinese are actively settling these lands and extracting a wide variety of natural resources for their economy.
So, is the transfer of Russian territories to Beijing just a matter of time?
In my opinion, today this will depend solely on China's desire because, well, there are some territories, small but still territories that Russia has already transferred to China legally. Yes, it's unclear on what grounds, but they have been transferred. But of course, if we're talking about large territories like the Far East and Siberia, then Chinese business expansion is, in many places, simply total.
It seems that China's policy is quite simple. Xi simply chooses whatever is more beneficial to him, and it doesn't matter whether Putin is involved or not at all.
He's just hanging around under my feet here. Well, whatever, we'll make use of it here, but we'll see how things go later. If it's profitable, we'll stay in some kind of relationship. If it's not, we'll just send them packing.
Let Putin go on living in his rosy dreams about a reliable partner in the form of China. In reality, though, Beijing acts according to its own logic. It takes resources, technology, and investments, but never takes risks for the sake of someone else's interests.
Urgent. Hungary has crossed the line. A diplomatic explosion in the heart of Europe. Orban is going all in, demands ultimatums, but Ukraine has already prepared a tough response. Zelensky has laid his cards on the table. Budapest did not expect this. What is really happening behind closed doors? Watch. Hungarian political pressure on Ukraine has reached its peak. Hungary's pro-Russian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is threatening to force Kyiv to act on his terms and, it seems, has already moved to action.
The pressure is unprecedented, but it all came about precisely thanks to the persistence and consistency shown by Orban and his ruling clique. You could even say that quite boldly.
On the night of March 6th, it became known that Hungary had unjustifiably detained 2 armored vehicles belonging to Hotspot's cash-in-transit service and 7 Ukrainian citizens, members of the cash-in-transit team. This happened in Budapest, while the Ukrainians were carrying out a routine transfer of foreign currency and banking metals between a Ukrainian and a Hungarian bank. The vehicles were transporting $40 million, 35 million euros, and 9 kilograms of gold.
Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha, stated that the Hungarian authorities had effectively taken the Ukrainians hostage and stolen the money. Contact with the Oshid Bank employees has been lost, and their current condition is unknown. Ukrainian consuls are not being allowed access to the abducted cash couriers.
According to media reports citing sources, the vehicles are located on a restricted site belonging to the Hungarian Counter-Terrorism Center, which is under the control of the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
At the same time, Hungary's tax authority has confirmed the detention of 7 Ukrainian citizens. They stated that the Ukrainians are suspected of money laundering. A criminal case has already been opened regarding this incident.
Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is urging its citizens not to travel to Hungary following the detention of the cash couriers and the theft of property belonging to the state bank in Budapest. The ministry noted that they cannot guarantee the safety of Ukrainians due to the arbitrariness of the Hungarian authorities.
They accuse a country that has become a victim of aggression of being aggressive toward Hungary, even though this is an outright lie and in general obvious, since they have clearly become an agent of Kremlin influence. Every single aspect of this situation is entirely logical and consistent, and it eventually culminates in a definitive peak, where there is now an unfortunate opportunity for political terrorism, in the specific form of seizing cash-in-transit vehicles.
At the same time, Putin is actively helping Orban in the overall scheme of putting pressure on Ukraine. On March 4th, Hungarian Minister Péter Szijjártó personally took 2 Ukrainian armed forces prisoners of war who have dual citizenship, Ukrainian and Hungarian, to Moscow. Orban has already called this the liberation of his people from forced mobilization. Ukraine condemned the transfer of its citizens without any coordination with Kyiv as a gross violation of international law, calling it a provocation and the politicization of the sensitive issue of prisoners of war. But what preceded these events? And why is it that Orban has started putting especially strong pressure on Ukraine right now? Let's figure it out. On March 5th, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated that he is ready to use force to make Ukraine resume the transit of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline. According to Orban, Hungary has political and financial tools to force Ukraine to resume oil transit.
At present, Hungary has officially appealed to the European Commission, demanding that Ukraine be forced to fulfill the transit agreement, while the European Union has stated that the shutdown of the Druzhba pipeline does not currently threaten the bloc's energy security.
For his part, President Zelensky once again reminded everyone that the pipeline was damaged specifically as a result of Russian attacks. And it is worth noting here that Budapest is using the blocking of the European Union's 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine for 2026 to 2027 as one of its levers of pressure on Kyiv. And this is the only EU country that is preventing this decision from being adopted. Most likely it was this very factor that President Zelensky was commenting on the day before. His words have become a new twist in this story.
I hope that one person in the European Union will not block 90 billion or the first tranche of the 90 billion, and that our Ukrainian soldiers will have weapons. Otherwise, we will give this person's address to our armed forces, to our guys, and let them call and talk to him in their own language.
The Hungarian government called this statement by the Ukrainian leader an open threat. These words were also criticized by the leader of Hungary's opposition.
Peter Magyar believes that the Ukrainian president should retract his words regarding the Hungarian prime minister.
After that, in fact, the detention of Ukrainian cash couriers in Budapest took place. But many experts believe that even if Zelensky hadn't made such a statement, the government led by Orban would have acted in the same way anyway. And there are several reasons for this.
It is quite obvious to any observer here that this blatant selling of his entire political soul directly to the Kremlin, which Viktor Orban has so clearly and demonstrably done, has inevitably and predictably led to the undeniable fact that throughout this long and troubling devolution he underwent, moving from a promising democratic youth leader to becoming, well, an outright and shameless agent of Moscow's strategic influence, a completely and utterly corrupt figure who is primarily interested in the continuous supply of Russian oil, and over the course of the last 4 years has done absolutely nothing to diversify those energy sources, simply because this arrangement provides a direct and personal benefit for him. So, when you look at the whole picture, this is also an absolutely natural and expected outcome.
And all this is happening against the backdrop of the crucial April elections to the Hungarian parliament for Orban.
In the specific context of these upcoming elections, when for the very first time since the year 2010, there is a genuine, credible threat that Viktor Orban could actually lose his grip on power, a leader who is, clearly and increasingly autocratic, and who, starting somewhere around 2012, has had significant ongoing problems with the European Union because he has obviously violated its core founding principles and the fundamental principles of democracy. He is, yes, naturally, in this intense political struggle, choosing to follow this particular path. This strategic move reflects his long-term approach to maintaining control, despite the mounting pressure from both domestic opponents and international institutions alike.
It is obvious that as long as Hungary's government is led by the pro-Russian politician Viktor Orban, Ukraine will always face pressure from Budapest. But will Ukraine and its partners be able to counteract this, and will Orban remain in power? Only time can answer these questions. A massive catch in Sumy. The occupiers' top priority target has been shot down. The sky over Russia has turned into a graveyard. The aerial massacre continues. Ukrainian defenders have given the occupiers a one-way ticket. Dark days for Putin's elite pilots. Watch for shocking details of this epic hunt.
On the night of March 5th, the Ukrainian Navy, together with Special Operations Forces units, struck the Sivash drilling platform in the Black Sea, where Russian units were stationed.
This platform was used by the enemy as an observation post, a communications relay, and a site for deploying electronic warfare and short-range air defense systems with the purpose of controlling strike UAVs that were aimed at attacking the infrastructure of Odessa and Mykolaiv regions and posed a threat to civilian shipping. As a result of the combat operations carried out by maritime unmanned drones and aerial unmanned vehicles, enemy command and communication assets were struck, and significant personnel losses were inflicted.
Furthermore, Ukrainian military forces also successfully destroyed a Russian Ka-27 helicopter. while it was actively attempting to land on the offshore drilling platform.
We routinely drive the Russians out of there from time to time, but this time the events unfolded much more dramatically for them, because now, even if someone is still left on one of those platforms, they will have to wait a long time for evacuation, and the evacuation will be complicated precisely because the site is now occupied by a destroyed helicopter. The Ukrainian Defense Forces used various means. Drones, unmanned boats, as well as air assets were used. The approach was carefully planned, taking into account what kind of weapons were there. The helicopter was shot down as it was landing, and all the equipment there was damaged. They used that tower for relaying and jamming signals.
2 weeks ago, the defense forces destroyed 2 more Russian helicopters, a multi-purpose Mi-8 and an attack Ka-52 using strike drones. The Russian birds were attacked at the Pugachevka airfield in the Oriel region.
It is likely that the Russians are using this site as an operational airfield for a combined helicopter unit tasked with intercepting Ukrainian long-range UAVs. The destroyed multipurpose Mi-8 helicopter, tail number 53, belonged to the 319th Separate Helicopter Regiment based in Chernigovka, Primorsky Krai, Russia. The Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter, tail number 18, belonged to the 16th Army Aviation Brigade located in Zernograd, Rostov region.
Ukrainian systematic attacks on airfields and locations where Russian aviation is based have shown that the occupiers have serious problems. There is a shortage of pilots. Ukrainian forces are increasingly managing to strike Russian aircraft right on the ground. In other words, the Kremlin simply does not have enough pilots to relocate planes and helicopters. The effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes has also increased significantly.
Actions taken in advance are more effective than trying to counter these means when they are already in the air. We see this thanks to technical advancements, the adoption of new types of weaponry, the modernization of old ones, and the training of maintenance personnel.
According to open sources, the deaths of about 110 combat aircraft pilots and more than 150 attack and transport helicopter pilots have been confirmed. In other words, total losses among Russian pilots since the start of the full-scale invasion amount to at least 260 pilots. And this does not include accidents and incidents that have occurred with Russian aviation within Russia itself.
Emergency negotiations have been disrupted. Moscow is officially withdrawing from the Great Game. Using the bloody chaos in the Middle East as a smokescreen, Putin has slammed the door on diplomacy. Is this a temporary pause or the final negotiation for the peace process? It happened. Budanov firmly put the Kremlin in its place. Putin's plans have failed. Watch for all the details.
Putin wants to use the war in the Middle East as a pretext to withdraw from peace talks with Ukraine. The war in the Middle East.
Kremlin officials criticized the United States for military operations against Iran and used the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East to create conditions to blame the United States for any future failures in peace negotiations regarding Ukraine.
In the context of negotiations, the war in Iran has played into Moscow's hands. After all, in recent weeks, the Russians have focused on sabotaging the peace process.
If you remember, after Geneva, they were already preparing the ground to disrupt them. What were they doing? If you remember, they were talking about nuclear rhetoric, about how France or Britain, though they hadn't fully decided yet, was supposedly planning to transfer nuclear weapons to Ukraine.
Now, instead of the pseudo-historian Medinsky leading the delegation, and instead of fake stories about transferring nuclear weapons or Ukraine attempting to assassinate Putin in Valdai, Russian propagandists and officials have settled on the topic of the unreliability of negotiations with the US.
And we understand that a conversation about Iran is also a conversation about Russia. They will treat us the same way now. They will strike Russia even harder.
They say that the spirit of Anchorage has been destroyed. This was primarily due to the specific political actions of the United States government.
The point is that in negotiations, the Kremlin is interested exclusively in Ukraine's capitulation, with the voluntary withdrawal of the armed forces of Ukraine from the territory of Donbass. Kyiv obviously will not agree to such demands from the aggressor. According to
On the territorial issue, we are currently searching for a compromise between two extremely polarized positions. So far, we have not found it. In the end, we will have to state either we find a solution and we all end this war, or we all take responsibility for it. Responsibility to state that we have not found a solution and continue to kill each other, which we are doing quite skillfully and professionally.
At the same time, Washington continues to believe in the negotiation process. According to Donald Trump, the war with Iran has not affected his previous position in any way.
As for Russia and Ukraine, where does this stand on my list of priorities? Very high. I've seen a lot of hatred in my life, but I think this is at the very top of the scale. I believe it will happen. Sometimes I blame one side, sometimes I blame the other. But it matters. But it ranks high on my list.
Meanwhile, while negotiations are on hold, the IRF and Ukraine are becoming noticeable participants in the Middle Eastern war. Moscow provides military and political support to the Iranian regime.
They support us politically and in other matters. Military cooperation between Iran and Russia is no secret. You know, we've worked with each other before, and this continues and will continue, I hope.
In turn, Kyiv, according to Volodymyr Zelensky, will provide support to the US and their Middle Eastern allies who are suffering from attacks by Iranian drones.
When Ukraine communicates with the Gulf countries, when the United States of America and personally Trump ask Ukraine to share technologies that, without a doubt, Ukraine now possesses, some of the best and most relevant in the world. NATO is a positive signal that can definitely be used to strengthen its negotiating position. As a result,